Thank you for joining us today on this Wednesday. I can see we have a lot of Manila House members here. Welcome. We have some as well on the panel. So thank you everyone for joining us. On behalf of Manila House, I'm Bambina Olivares, the Director of Programming. And today we talk about education, which is something that impacts all of us. And we're already experiencing a kind of situation now where every aspect of life is impacted by the pandemic. But education, I think, in many ways more so, because this has to do with the formation of our citizens, of our children, and the populace for for work, for careers in the future, and also, of course, personal development and emotional health development too. So all these aspects are impacted by the current circumstances. Um, the pandemic has indeed upended our world, so it's forcing us to confront and redefine the experience of education. Um, this is now, we're looking at virtual education versus face-to-face, the different ways of learning delivery at this time, and how learning outcomes are impacted, and what the implications are for the future in terms of higher education, in terms of job prospects, in terms of, because education is supposed to prepare us for the world, prepare us for careers and employment, and as well as prepare us in terms of emotional adjustment and adaptability. And also there are the limitations of the Zoom format, as we were talking about earlier before we started. And it seems to be, we live in a three or multi-dimensional world, and we're back to two-dimensional learning. So all these things have their implications for learning and the future. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce all our speakers. We have here joining us today, we have some very distinguished guests. We have Dr. Michael Alba, who is president of Far Eastern University Group of Schools, a well-respected economist. He has extensively tackled development gaps and inclusive growth in his academic output. With over 20 years of teaching experience, Dr. Alba was previously affiliated with the University of the Philippines and De La Salle University. He served as Dean of the latter's College of Business and Economics from 2001 to 2006. Apart from being an educator, Dr. Alba also consulted for numerous economic organizations, including the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, International Development Research Center, and the United States Agency for International Development. In 2007, he was the president of the Philippine Economic Society. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree from the Ateneo de Manila University, as well as a Master of Arts degree from the University of the Philippines. He received his PhD in Applied Economics from Stanford University. Next up, we have Felicia Atienza, the founder of the Chinese International School of Manila. Feli Atienza is currently serving as the school's president and CEO. She graduated from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, with a BSE with a dual major in finance and multinational management, cum laude. She previously worked in finance as Director of Institutional Equity Sales at Merrill Lynch Securities Philippines and Merrill Lynch International London, as well as Associate Director at JP Morgan Fleming Philippines. Mother of four, she leads an active, multifaceted lifestyle, sits on the board of several organizations that reflect her commitment to education, empowerment, and the environment. Henry Mott Munoz joins us as well. He is the founder of Educación PH, the largest edtech platform in the Philippines that empowers the youth to explore within their reach and learn with purpose. Henry completed his MBA at Harvard Business School in 2013 and his BSc in Economics and Economics History at the London School of Economics in 2007. Prior to launching Educación PH in 2015, Henry worked at Bain Capital and Goldman Sachs in London. Henry's work in education technology and social entrepreneurship has been recognized by global and regional organizations, including the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders 2020, Asia CEO Awards Young Leader of the Year 2019, Financial Times and International Finance Corporation Transformational Business Award in 2017, and Forbes 30 Under 30 in Asia 2016, and Asia Society 21 Young Leaders 2015. Also joining us as reactors to our panelists are Professor Emmanuel de Dios, who is Professor Emeritus at the University of the Philippines School of Economics, where he spent close to 4 decades in teaching and research, at some point serving as dean from 2007 to 2010. He has written and edited a number of books, monographs, journal articles on various economic topics, notably dealing with the country's fiscal problems, exchange rate policy, poverty, human development, the role of institutions in development, choice theory, and the history of economic thought. Some of his work has been recognized by the National Academy of Science and Technology, the Catholic Mass Media Awards, and the United Nations Development Program. He was named Outstanding Young Scientist by NAST in 1993, Outstanding Teacher in UP Diliman, the Chancellor's Award, and the Centennial Fellow of UP in 2008. He received his PhD in economics in 1987 from the University of the Philippines after a bachelor's degree in the same field from the Ateneo de Manila. He also undertook postgraduate studies and research at various times at the University of Constance in Germany and the University of California in Berkeley. His current research topics deal with the middle class and social mobility in the Philippines, with the free trade advocacy of Manuel Azcárraga y Palmero. And finally, we have as a reactor Elizabeth Sobel de Ayala, who is a social entrepreneur in the Philippines where she has lived since 1987. Lizzie is co-founder and chairman of Teach for the Philippines, a country partner of Teach for America, which enlists some of the most promising young Filipino leaders to teach in the public school system. A native of Colombia, Lizzie is a founding board member of the Friendly Care Foundation and the Forum for Family Planning and Development, and a former member of the boards of the Population Council in New York City and the National Museum of the Philippines. He's a trustee for the Center of Asian Philanthropy and Society in Hong Kong, a research and advisory organization committed to maximizing private resources to do social good in Asia. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Philosophy and Economics from Boston College. Thank you so much. And with that, I will turn you over to Feli Atienza. Thank you.
Thank you, Bambina. So good evening, everyone. My name is Feli Atienza. So I'm starting the presentation representing a K-12 international school, that's Chinese International School, Manila, and sharing with you our experience in preparing the Filipino student for higher education during a pandemic. And so CISM, just a little backpedaling a little bit, we were, when the announcement was made on May 10, when Duterte announced suspension of classes, we were actually, our mood meter was smug. Because we thought, oh, we've been doing this for the last 3 years. We've kicked in distance learning, especially for unforeseen events like floods, APEC, transport strikes. And so our teachers were fairly skilled in distance learning. March 16 comes around and Duterte announces that ECQ is going to be imposed in the entire Luzon, including Metro Manila, of course, beginning midnight of March 17, and this was going to run until April 13. Now the mood meter shifts a little bit from smug to moderate anxiety. Fortunately, our demographic is fairly homogeneous, and we were not hobbled by a digital divide nor the broadband gap. And this allowed what we thought would be a seamless transition to online, giving us faculty told us that they didn't have proper action, and some of them lacked devices. So as we braced for a prolonged distance learning scenario, we ensured that the cornerstone of all our decision making was to ensure the success of every student. And as we braced for it, let me share a quote from Confucius, and Bambina, we could move the slide. So there were many members of admin and faculty, the academic leadership team, We can do that, we can't do that. No, we can do that, we can't do that. And so looking back, the man who says he can and the man who says he cannot, both are correct. And so what we did was, we were very lucky that we got the team together before ECQ, and we recommitted ourselves to our ensuring the success of every student. We reorganized ourselves, and we knew that we had to resolve issues and constantly address them as they evolved and as they cropped up. Then as the pandemic got prolonged, we had to constantly refresh, sometimes restart, sometimes it was a hard reset, and we had to recreate. And this helped us revitalize, recalibrate, and eventually revision. Revision a new narrative for teaching and learning. And so let me share a little bit about what we've done with online learning. Next slide. So yes, of course, it was very important for us to choose the right platform, the right digital applications, digital equipment as well. So we were fortunate that we had a whole menu of applications, such as PowerSchool, Manage Back, Follow Destiny, applications being used by the front end, the back end, the library. We were already on Google Classroom with EBSCO, with Atlas Rubicon. So we had a lot of subscriptions, but we need to also engage the students. And so we had to add, there was a big debate for Zoom and Google Meet. We eventually ended up with Zoom. We kicked in Seesaw, Padlet, Quizlet, Kahoots, and many other teaching enhancements. This allowed us to deliver both synchronous and asynchronous learning. But what was very interesting was that we wanted to stand apart from the pack and not just have enhanced distance learning, a tangible element to distance learning. And so what did we do? Student supply. We opened our library. I mean, it was, you were not allowed to open a library at IATF, so we called it the Learning Resource Center. And the kids were allowed to check out books, which we then Lala moved to them. And Lala Move picked it back up, from their homes to us. And when school year ended, we said, let's do something different. So Zoom parties were in vogue, Zoom celebrations were in vogue, but we said, we are going to have a drive-through graduation. So we managed to pull it off. And that was very rewarding. And so it became from a situation of, we can't do that, to let's focus on what we can do. So the kids, so just a little bit of a snippet on that. We knew that kids could not leave their homes and go to school. So they stayed in the car, and not once were they allowed to step down from the car. So it was their parents who stepped down. They held a tablet with a photo of their child, and they received the diploma. And then as they drove through, then we took a photo of the students driving through. And the honking of the horn signified clapping of the hands. So on online learning, it's very important for us to solicit feedback and to act on it as well. And we conducted a recent survey last week, and kids told us, and and they are now suffering from screen fatigue. So on average, our elementary school and early years students spend about 4 or 5 hours on the screen, and middle school, high schools can spend about 6 to 8 hours on the screen. This is class time. So right now, we're trying to figure out how we can have less of the synchronous and online learning and actually more hands-on activities. And so that's one of the big focus going forward. And just to give you another idea, we're doing a spooky tunnel for Halloween. And again, with kids not leaving their cars, but in their cars and coming through a spooky tunnel in school. Interestingly, also, while all of this is happening, it was very important to upskill teachers, upskill them on their multimedia aptitude as well as their digital pedagogy. So as a package of the online learning, assessment was also very key. How do you assess students? I think academic honesty, a lot of schools grappled with that. And so we resorted to some online examity, let's say, .com. We also did time-lapse videos, we did prompts, we did cameras facing the hands. And so teachers became very creative with their assessment. And of course, we wanted the assessment to be more project-based and performance-based, which were more difficult for kids to teach and actually showed more evidence of learning. Fortunately, the standard-based exam that our kids normally take, which is the measures of academic progress, that went web-based. And so 6 million kids all over the world take the measures of academic progress. And so we were still able to benchmark ourselves globally. And lastly, we wanted to ensure that the learning was holistic. So we still had our sports clubs, we had our varsity clubs, we had our after school activity clubs. We continued as well with our service learning. And moving on to the COVID-19 protocol. So we actually made a decision that unless DEFED Order 007 was overturned, we were going to have face-to-face classes. So this commitment, we held that commitment very firmly up until end of July, when all schools were saying they were going to be remote. And so we really prepared for both ranges of the scenario, whether it was going to be face-to-face, whether it was going to, whether the government was going to change or maybe impose that there's going to be no face-to-face. And so we thought up various scenarios such as staggered, rotational classes, outdoor classes, hybrid classes, split online, on-campus classes. And we had various measures to mitigate COVID-19 transmission. The first one would have been, complete testing of faculty and staff, regular testing, and the standards that we see today: the health declaration, the temperature checks, personal hygiene, social distancing, ingress, egress, directional flow, regular sanitation, especially in high touch areas. Those are sanitized every 2 hours. We had the isolation room in place. Everything was set up. So even in the classroom setting, we changed middle school, high school to just the homeroom. So kids didn't walk around anymore. It was the teachers walking around. We zoned the IB students as well. Even in the cafeteria, it was going to be on a pre-order basis, bento box basis, no choosing of a spread. And we were very, very excited. And we felt we had multiple layers of protection in place. But unfortunately, DEPED announces that there will be no face-to-face. So I'll discuss the next part of our preparation. I think that we really did not feel that the emotional and social well-being of students was going to take a very it's actually a very essential and critical role, right? Weeks into the online learning, there were a few questions on you feel is a needs assessment. No, there's too many questions. Strike out all these questions on psychological, and 2 or 3. Only to read months later, 1 to 2 months later, of students, and I was sharing this early, the faculty, they were feeling isolated. They were feeling overwhelmed. They were saying that they were so stressed, tense, and panicky, and so we had to throw the lifeline as well to the teachers. So a lot of what we did, well-being, centered around UNICEF's executive director Henrietta Force, their counselors. They've come up with a well-being plan. We told their students same time, have your meals at a certain, have a routine. Important to stay connected. Call each other, chat with each other, ask how you're feeling as well. In hobbies, engage in. And so, if so many people baking and cooking, if you enjoy knit. Number 4, very important, set up a worry window at a certain time every day. Write down what is worrying you, let it out. And last, engage in activities, whether these exercise and keeping a gratitude journal, celebrating little wins and congratulating yourself. That not everything has been canceled. You can still sing, you can still dance, you can still read, you can still play, you can still laugh, you can still hope, until letting them know not everything's been canceled. So we got the parents involved as well, information campaign, having regular speakers involving the parents. And lastly, college preparedness. So that's the last piece of the puzzle. And I think that international schools, the students are very lucky because they do have college counselors that do create an integrated program for them and give them personalized attention and individualized tracking. And so this really helps in their college preparation. When consultations with a college counselor, really trying to focus on their interests, their strengths and talents, and making sure aligned with their college choices and eventually their career choices. Information is very key because the, 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 the protocols were constantly changing, whether it's test optional but not test blind, um, and really just knowing, and the start dates going hybrid to face, and these impacted student decisions as well. And so we use a platform. We used to use Naviance, and then we migrated to Shelfo. But of course, there's also Education PH, which is a wonderful platform as well of Henry, who's here today. We also involve the kids in early intervention, or whether we see red flags in their academics or in other parts of, to make sure that they're quite well-rounded, tap that and try to level up and close the gaps. And so early intervention is very key as well for us during this pandemic. Send-off notes and videos, connecting them with experts on how to avoid being a victim of crime, connecting them with parents who talked about, basic household skills like cooking, like using the washing machine, like ironing your clothes, and connecting them with people from the medical profession about protecting yourself during this pandemic, and the hygiene protocols that they should follow. And it's actually really enjoyed that. Of course, we also had the etiquette classes on the proper use of the spoon and forks and how to tie their tie, and greetings. And so those were the 5 main college prep steps that I think are essential for the students. And I forgot to add that in the information, I think there was increasing requests for like scholarships as well, who gave scholarships during this time. And so what inspires us? And that's the last quote, also from Confucius, whose sayings are as relevant then as it is today. What inspires us is we plan for 1 year, plant rice. If you're planning for 10 years, plant trees. But if your plan is for 100 years and for the future, educate children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Feli, for that very comprehensive overview. You basically covered the whole educational career of a child from grade school all the way to, well, college preparedness. And you did touch upon Educación PH and the resources, educational resources that are available, and maybe not many people, parents or students or even institutions are aware of what's available out there. And Henry has, through his startup, has managed to connect students and institutions all over the world, I believe, at various levels, right? So Henry will tell us more about his educational platform, Educación PH. Thank you, Henry.
Hi, thanks so much, Mambina, and great talk, Feli. Thanks so much for having us. I believe this is a very timely topic, and so I think it's incredibly interesting to discuss the different elements. I think from Education's perspective, we'd love to share a little bit for a couple of minutes the ed tech, if you will, the education technology perspective. I have with me my colleague Griana Puno, who I believe will be sharing her screen in a second with a little presentation that we've put together. So as you can see, our motto Education has always been about, we actually rebranded earlier this year about, making the future less scary. And actually on the website, we've now changed this to making the present less scary, because let's face it, I think with the pandemic that the students are facing, with all the changes that the parents have to adapt to, people aren't necessarily just trying to plan for the future, they're literally trying to make sense of the present. If you go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit of our story. So we've been around for 5 years. We're a team of about 40 people spread over the Philippines. And our mission is to essentially, help help students explore learning. We call it within reach. And this whole idea is it's not just about pushing for a certain academic agenda or a certain specific pathway, but it's a little bit helping each student find their own pathway. And whether that leads them to studying abroad or studying in the Philippines, taking up a college education, taking a TechVoc course, studying online, we think there's different paths for different students. And part of our job is to help them discover what's the right path for them. So as we're trying to build this ecosystem, I think we've been quite lucky in the last few years in terms of getting some partners on board. So we have about more than 800 schools in the Philippines and abroad, most of them in the Philippines. And with names ranging from Ateneo de Manila to AMA, to FEU, to STI, to Catholic colleges. And so it's a pretty widespread in terms of the type of education, the type of institution, the price points. We've also been building a corporate and foundation practice, which we didn't intend to be honest, when we started 5 years ago. It's just as we got more and more students, we found that there's a lot of very progressive corporations, brands, foundations out there that are interested in empowering the youth. And so even if they're not involved themselves in very formal academic education, they want to get involved in youth empowerment. And I'll share a little bit more of the kind of stuff we've done with them over the years. We have a community of about 500,000 students in the Philippines. They're all aged 13 to 24. But there's actually also a lot of students who haven't registered but still use the website since it's completely free for students. And so every year we get about 8 million students coming. Some of them just come once or twice. Some of them come every month or every week. There's quite a spread. And so that's the community we keep trying to empower. I think, in a way, we're very excited to have grown over the last couple of years to 8 million. In a way, we sometimes get frustrated because we feel like the students who might need the service the most are the ones who probably don't have internet access. And so in a way, one of the challenges for EdTech is that you're trying to bridge the divide, but in some ways you're actually accentuating it, because those with devices, those with internet, you give them this great free resource. Those who have neither don't get any of the advice, don't get any of the help. And so, and we're trying to bridge this. We have some cool partnerships coming up with the two big telcos, but it's definitely something that we haven't been able to crack just yet. If you go to the next slide. So this slide's a bit of a mouthful. I do apologize, but it's one that we feel very passionate about. And frankly, that's why everyone in our team has quit, careers in corporate or in other opportunities to basically join a, long hours, stressful, underpaid environment, which startups are. And the thing about this funnel that's very important to note is that this was pre the pandemic, right? So this was when the Philippines was growing at 6 to 7% a year. We were suffering from this very narrow outcome, in a sense that out of 2 million students who turn 18, every year in the Philippines, about 1.7 would actually graduate senior high. Even though senior high school is free, even though there's a fantastic voucher program which allows you to study in public or in private senior high school. So despite this, you're already losing about 300,000 students. They don't all drop off at the end. Some of them drop off as early as primary school. But you already have hundreds of thousands of students who don't even have a high school degree. And then of those who actually graduate high school, a surprisingly large number go into higher education, especially if you consider our income per capita. The Philippines is actually a very high college placement rate. I think it's 2 to 3 times higher than Indonesia, for example. But what's interesting is, and what's worrying is, even though a high number enroll into TechVoc or college, a lot of them will actually drop out. Very often it's for financial reasons, or they take the wrong course, or they're not able to finish it academically. And so you actually only end up with about 400,000 who will graduate from the course that they started. And then the worst statistic is that out of those who graduate, only half of them will find a job. And again, this was pre-pandemic. So the numbers now are for sure much worse. And so when you have a funnel that leaves 90% of students behind in a high growth economy, you know that something's wrong. And I think, it's in small font, but for me, the stat that really woke me up when we started Education 5 years ago was graduate students were not finding jobs, and yet if you spoke to most CEOs in the country, their biggest issue was recruiting. They would tell you, economy is booming, my business is growing, I can't recruit fast enough. We would hear this from banks, we would hear this from telcos, we would hear this from engineering companies, we'd hear this from hairdressers and massage parlors, literally all the skills that you can imagine, people are having a hard time hiring. And so this is what prompted us to want to start education. It's clearly there's a desire to study in the Philippines, and that's incredibly important. It's not something we should take for granted. The Philippines is a culture where education is highly valued. The students want to get an education. The parents want their kids to get educated. There is not much of a gender divide. We are not the kind of country where only the boys get to go to school. And so again, these are all great advantages we can build on. But we need to give better advice to the students. We need to get them the opportunities, whether it's lower cost education, free education, or scholarships, to make sure that everyone actually gets into an education that prepares them for the world of work. Because this current funnel works for no one. It doesn't work for the students, doesn't work for businesses, and doesn't work for the country as a whole. So if you go to the next slide, I think zooming in a little bit on the change in behavior during COVID. I think so. As a platform, we've been banging on about access to education and improvements in education outcomes for years, like all the other panelists. But one of the things that used to frustrate us a little bit was that students were coming to this website and looking for information, but they were not interacting that much. So it all felt a little bit passive in a way. People were still almost like they were resigned to the path that they were going to take, which means that if you're from a lower socioeconomic group, your parents will tell you that you should become a policeman or a nurse or a teacher because that's a safe profession. And if you're from a higher socioeconomic group, it's, my daughter should be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, because these are high paid, safe professions. And what we actually found was that during the pandemic, there are a lot of negative externalities, but one of the positive ones is that suddenly everyone was questioning their education. And we had this chatbot which allows students to talk to us, and we answer automatically to questions they have. And we were getting a few hundred inquiries a week max, literally up until the lockdown. And then suddenly we went from 1,000 inquiries a month to about 30,000 a month. This means suddenly students are taking their education much more into their own hands and saying, what, this system is not working, especially with this online learning. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on. Let me play a more active role in making educational choices. And so for us, this is one of the positive silver linings of COVID. There's a spotlight on education. Before starting this panel, we were all huddled for about half an hour. And one of the things that we were mentioning was a lot of the deficiencies in the education sector are now coming to light. They're now being brought online. And it's going to be painful. It's going to be chaotic. But ultimately, it's going to lead to a better education system. When learners start questioning what their options are, when parents start asking, what am I paying for? Even if it's free public education, my taxes are paying for it. Like, what is my child learning? We think there's going to be an improvement in educational outcomes, but it is going to be a very difficult, 18 to 24 months. If you go to the next slide, we want to share something that's a bit more positive, if you will, which is, amidst the pandemic, amidst the lockdown, amidst all the difficulties, there's a real desire to learn by students. And I think sometimes that gets lost a little bit in some of the headlines in the media where you see that students are saying, stop online learning, academic freeze, etc. The reality is that Gen Z, as a generation, loves to learn. And even if you think that, they're wasting their time on TikTok or on Instagram, a lot of it is actually around learning still. One of the fastest growing categories on YouTube is actually learning videos. People turn to YouTube not just to learn life skills or soft skills, but even academic skills. So there's actually a desire to learn, and there's a existing consumption pattern of learning online. It just looks very different from the kind of content that typically kids are taught in the classroom. So I think the big challenge is kids love YouTube, kids love Instagram, kids love TikTok, but you can't really teach algebra on TikTok either. So how do you bridge that divide? But I think that the fact that there's a desire to learn for us is a positive. And if you go to the next slide, the other thing that we've been able to find out from our research is that Gen Z is a very different generation. I'm a millennial, well, borderline. So I'm 2x the Gen Z's target age. And if I look at the way my generation was making educational choices and the way this generation is making them, it is literally a very different generation, right? They seek three things, and obviously there's differences across social number groups, but we found this resonated quite strongly amongst many of our millions of users. One of them is about independence, which in a Filipino context that's incredibly respectful of parents and of older generations is quite a paradigm shift. Is this whole idea of like, I need to have the power to choose and make my own decisions. The second one is around acceptance, which all of us crave. But I think what's interesting is the acceptance that Gen Z crave is around being unique as opposed to fitting in, which again I would say is quite different from other generations, at least from the other ones. And then the third one, which actually I think really links to 1 and 2, is this whole idea of like a redefined success, a new definition of what success is. And I think in the space of education, this really matters because one of the issues that we face in the Philippines is there's these very set views of what kids should study, which I've mentioned earlier, right? Depends on your socioeconomic background. As a parent, you will try to push your kids towards essentially a handful of careers. But the reality is, if you look at the job market now, there's hundreds of career paths. There's jobs that none of us heard of when we were studying: UX designer, product manager, customer experience. I mean, these are all things that are evolutions or revolutions in the job place. And what's very interesting is that students are hungry to try these new things. And it's actually good for us to encourage students to take this, because if as a country we only produce nurses or we only produce engineers, we will have a very undiversified workforce. And that's very dangerous. And so actually, we see at Education a very nice alignment between, the Gen Z wants, the Gen Z desires, and what the country actually needs, what the employers actually need. Because if you have a very, varied type of pathways that students can pursue, this is actually very good for employers, because then your labor pool becomes very diversified and you can really get all sorts of talent to join your organization. So we see this as a positive, and we think that, COVID is here to stay for a year, for 2 years, but these are macro trends. Students will not stop craving independence or acceptance because there's a pandemic. And so we think it's very important to remember these positive changes in Gen Z, which we think will endure past the shock of the lockdown and of the pandemic. If you go to the next slide, I think we have a responsibility, and when I say we, it's not just Education, but it's really just broadly anyone who's interested in education. And as Feli mentioned, if we're all planning for the future, that should be all of us here. We need to make sure that we're giving students the right guidance. And for us, it's not just about the academic guidance. So I think on education, yes, that's important. What school should they go to? What courses should they take? If they can't afford it, which is a massive issue in the country, how can they fund it? Through scholarships or through discounts or government grants. But we should also talk to them about their career. Education, at the end of the day, is a stepping stone to being a successful adult with a fulfilling career. And that means we have to talk to them early about job prospects, about personal development, about workplace skills. And I think, there's been some great research coming out of the US around how apparently the optimal age to start talking to students about this, I think, is 8 or 9, which, strikes me as a bit early. But actually, if you think about it, if you're already talking to students, and you shouldn't talk to them about like, oh, do you want to be a banker or do you want to be an accountant at 8 or 9? But it's more about what problem do you want to solve? What kind of skills do you want to develop? And like having that conversation so that kids understand that as they go through education, whether it's high school or college, it's not about getting grades or a paper. It's about getting the skills that will help them, solve the problems that they want to solve in society. And then the third thing is actually, I think it's quite specific to an emerging market is, all of us were first-time consumers in that age group. Until you're 13, 14, you're not a consumer. You basically eat the food that your parents give you, wear the clothes that your parents buy you, anything you consume is basically your parents' choice. But actually, as you enter your teenage years, as you enter your college years, you start consuming. We're not here to tell them, what books to read or what car to buy, but we are here to, we think we should be teaching them things like financial literacy, so that as they start, opening their first bank account, using their first financial products, they actually know what they're doing. And because the Philippines is an emerging market, many of today's youth, their parents were not consuming those products. So most Filipino adults are actually financially illiterate. So we cannot wait on parents to teach their kids financial literacy. We need to do that job. And it's, whether it's the job of schools or foundations or corporates, or, that's up for debate. But I think for us, it's very clear that students need to get educated about these topics so that they can really have, all the right knowledge and skills to be successful as adults. And so that's why we always look at them from the perspective of being a student, of being a future job seeker, and of being a consumer. If you go to the next slide, I think I'll try to breeze a bit through them in terms of what students do on the platform. So on the education side, as a student, we help them look for education opportunities. We have a search engine, they can talk to a chatbot, we have personalized recommendation. I think what we're trying to do is get students to move away from, I should study in school X because my parents went there or because my tita tells me it's a good choice, and I should just pursue this path because everyone knows that you'll always need more accountants, so I should just do this. We're trying to get them to think about, what am I good at? What are the educational opportunities out there? What kind of jobs can I get by the time I graduate? And really expand that conversation. So that's the function of all of our education tools on the platform. If you go on the next slide, this is a bit more around making sure that students have a conversation. I think, one thing that I didn't say about Gen Z is they can be a little bit impatient, which they absolutely share with millennials. And so I think sometimes there's this belief that, like, okay, great, let me spend 10 minutes and figure out what I'm going to study. And part of our belief at Education is that actually this should be a conversation. In fact, it should be multiple conversations that you have with yourself, with your friends, with your teachers, with your parents, with the website. Consume content, figure out all the different paths. It's I think the education you pick is probably the most important decision you'll make outside of marriage. And so frankly, people spend a lot of time thinking about who they want to marry. They should be spending a lot of time thinking about what they want to study. And so we try to really push for content, and we literally rehash the same content. So what feeds a blog then becomes a chatbot, then becomes a quest, then becomes a short video. And it's always about sharing in different formats the same content about, think through all your options, essentially. We've gamified, we've added this thing where, we've realized that students like to get rewarded. And so essentially, don't quote me on this, but essentially it's a bit like parents who bribe their kids for good grades or for doing their homework. We're essentially telling kids that, look, if you spend time and you actually take quizzes and go through all your different educational options, a lot of interesting help from brands over the last 2 years, who all believe in youth empowerment. So with Cream Silk, they wanted to promote gender empowerment, and so helping Filipinas, kind of like break the glass ceiling that they sometimes are imposing on themselves. And so it was all about kind of upgrading your confidence. We're launching a partnership with Smart, which will be live, I believe, later this month. Which is all around asking, guidance counselors or fellow students for advice when it comes to making your choices. And then we've done work as well with Tang around, how parents can be involved, because right now the reality is all parents are being asked to be, stay-at-home teachers on top of doing their normal jobs through Zoom. So this is just a couple of the examples, and I think the note I'd leave you all with is, in this new normal, none of us really know what normal should look like. Uh, but I think if the last few months have taught us anything, is that that's actually okay. We've been pushing for innovation and disruption in education for the last 5 years, and so we've actually been grappling with trying to figure things out for 5 years. And so for us, having this situation where there's a lot of confusion as to what will work and what won't work, for education, that's been our normal for the last 5 years. And so we actually think that this is a great time to push for education reform, to increase expectations in terms of what quality education should look like, and to talk about a lot of the elephants in the room, which is, things like the digital divide, things like low quality materials that are sometimes shared with students, the fact that teachers will tend to be, in our opinion, underpaid and overworked. And so I think it's important for us to have these conversations in 2020 and 2021, because our wish is that for the academic year starting 2021, this will be the best ever academic year that students could look forward to. So obviously going to be very tough for the academic year, this academic year, but we think that with the right reforms, those starting school in June 2021 could be having a materially better education than any generation before them. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Henry. That was great. I mean, all those services that you offer, and quite a broad spectrum as well, covering so many different aspects. I think that's quite an invaluable resource. And actually, I learned about education. I think you just started a couple of years ago, and it's great to see how much it's grown since then. I think you were talking about educational reform. I think it's well, before I introduce you, Dr. Alba, I think it's safe to say that FEU, Far Eastern University, it's a private institution, a tertiary institution in the Philippines. It's not affiliated with any religion or religious order or anything of that sort, but it's actually been reform-minded for quite a while now, and it's spearheading a lot of innovations in the educational sector. And Dr. Alba will now tell us all about it. Thank you, Dr. Alba.
Wait.
Just press share screen.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Oops. Oops. Not yet. Wait.
I can see you.
I'm trying to share my screen share. Okay, there.
There you go.
Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, good evening. Thank you to Manila House for inviting me to take part in this webinar with such a distinguished panel of speakers and discussants. I was given a special and difficult assignment, and that is to talk about preparing the Filipino student for higher education during a pandemic in the context of two questions. First, what did FU do to make it better prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic? And second, why did FU innovate earlier and faster than the other schools? So I structured my presentation in terms of 5 questions. First, what impelled FU to embark on its transformation journey? Second, what insights drove FU's transformation journey? Third, what initiatives were undertaken as a result of these insights? To prepare. Fourth, what special considerations need to be made due to the pandemic to prepare the Filipino student for higher education? And fifth, what are the takeaways from this presentation? Note that the first question addresses why FEU innovated earlier and faster than the other schools. The third question addresses what FEU did that prepared it for the COVID pandemic. And the second, fourth, and fifth questions address the topic of the webinar. So, what impelled FEU to embark on its transformation journey? It was the regulatory and legislative shocks. As you may know, the last decade has been a disruptive period for private higher education in the Philippines. CHED Memorandum Order 46 series of 2012 overhauled the regulatory framework of private higher education. In exchange for varying degrees of autonomy, private higher education institutions or HEIs had to voluntarily self-declare to CHED whether they were a professional institute, college, or university, and then undergo an institutional sustainability assessment to determine whether their quality outcomes as institute, college, or university merited their being an autonomous, deregulated, or regulated HEI. Then Republic Act 10533 added 3 years to the basic education cycle, kindergarten and grades 11 and 12, which disrupted student flows to college over a 5-year transition period as grade 10 completers detoured to senior high school. The effect of the law was that in school year 2016 to 2017, there were no college freshmen. In school year 2017-2018, there were no college freshmen and sophomores. In 2018-2019, there were no college sophomores and juniors, and so on. And as if this were not enough disruption, in 2016, Republic Act 10931 provided for free college education in state universities and colleges or SUCs, and local government administered universities or colleges or LUCs. Given these developments, we in FU decided that our strategic response had to be to race to the top ahead of the competition. To compete with the SUCs and LUCs would not have been sustainable since nothing can beat free. And there would be a first mover advantage in being perceived earlier by the public to be a quality institution, as the latecomers would be fighting for a dwindling share of the market for private education. But then we did not want to simply take the metrics of university ranking outfits like Quacquarelli Simmons or Times Higher Education as our guiding beacons because, as Derek Bock notes in his book, Higher Education in America, and I would have more to say about this book later, the metrics do not directly reflect student outcomes. So instead, we opted to think through what quality education meant for FEU. And we came up with two insights. The first is that education is an experience good. In economics, an experience good is defined as a good or service whose quality is discerned by the consumer only in the process of consuming the good or service. Three distinctive features suggest that a good may be an experience good. First, we tend to seek expert advice, like movie critics' reviews, or the opinions of friends who have consumed the good. Second, regardless of the inputs from experts or friends, ultimately, the perceived quality of the good is a personal assessment. And third, our personal assessment, however, depends on A, the extent to which we accept the good's consumption premises, and B, how immersed and engaged we are in the consumption experience. Now, this is all a bit abstract, so let's take a specific example. Consider a movie. When we buy a movie ticket, at that point of sale, we do not know how well we will be affected by the movie. The impact of the movie on us depends on A, our predispositions to the premises, and B, our engagement with or immersion in the movie watching experience. A movie like literature presents its audience with an imagined universe, which may have its own special rules. A viewer who cannot suspend disbelief and cannot accept the special rules of that imagined world. For example, that in the Marvel universe, some people have superpowers, is not likely to enjoy the movie. On the other hand, a sleepy or distracted viewer will miss many details and will not have full appreciation of the movie. In contrast, a superfan will be so into the movie that you'll get the most out of the experience. In many ways, schooling is like the movie watching experience. For example, we know that the sleepy or distracted student will not get the same outcomes as an engaged student. Also, in school, students are presented with an artificial world. The course of study has been systematized and arranged by increasing levels of difficulty or degrees of student psychosocial development. The delivery of content and skills is highly stylized. That is, it's not presented in the way that they would be learned in the real world. And the delivery method is aggressive in that the questions and problems posed to students have been pruned to the essential points, and students are taught the correct and efficient methods of solving problems, and there is a correct answer to the questions asked, when in life there may not be. The hope of the schooling process, though, is that with enough drills, the student will develop the ability to A, distill the essential points from the questions she encounters in the real world, and B, apply the problem solving techniques learned in school. In any case, the upshot of this experience good insight is that the education journey is all about the student's user experience. And for that experience to be a high quality, deep impact experience, the school environment must be nurturing, inclusive, and accepting, that is, a safe space. And the school's curricular and co curricular offerings must be absorbing, immersive, and engaging for students. In a word, the school must get its students' buy in the schooling experience it offers. The second insight draws from Amartya Sen's capability approach to welfare economics. Amartya Sen is the 1998 Nobel laureate for economics and currently a professor at Harvard. His thesis in the capability approach is that a person's well-being and development should be considered not in terms of happiness or wealth, the way we usually construct it or define it in economics, but in terms of the effective opportunities she is empowered with to undertake the actions and activities of the life she values. Given our time tonight, that is all I can say about the capability approach. But for those of you who are interested, you can read more about it in the link that I provided in this slide. Anyway, applied to education, the capability approach implies that education must capacitate the learner to achieve the life that she aspires for. That is, education should empower her to find pathways to becoming the person she wants to be. Thus, the implication of the schooling as a capacitating process insight is that the school's product must be a transformative process that takes the learner from who she is when she first reports to the school to who she will be at exit, which is her capacitated self. Moreover, she and her family must find the transformation process credible. That is, it is not simply a promise, they can see that it can actually happen. But then we ask further, what does a capacitated self consist of in the context of the 21st century? That is for the Gen Zers. Content knowledge as prescribed by CHED and DepEd is of course the easy answer. But the harder outcomes to aim for are the transversal work and life skills. In case the vocabulary is new to you, transversal work skills are those that can be used in a wide variety of situations and work settings, which make the learner invulnerable to unemployment because she'll always have the skills that are in demand. So in turn, we explored what the 21st century work and life settings will look like, and we discovered Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval Noah Harari is an Oxford-trained historian who is now a professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He has written three bestsellers so far: Sapiens, which is a history of humans; Homo Deus, which is the future of humans, where he says that we are destined to become gods, with the aids of bioengineering and artificial intelligence, and 21 lessons for the 21st century. In this third book, Harari warns that disruptive technological change is coming. More specifically, information technology and biotechnology, that is, artificial intelligence or AI on the one hand, and robotics and bioengineering on the other, are converging as fields. And this will have the effect of radically changing both the world of work and life as we currently know them. It is likely that many traditional jobs will disappear, and those that remain or replace them will demand high levels of expertise. Moreover, the new jobs will likely require human AI interaction, the nature of which will constantly be changing as automation takes more and more of what workers do. Takes over, I meant more and more of what workers do. In his chapter on education, Harari writes, humans as individuals and humankind as a whole will increasingly have to deal with things nobody has encountered before, such as super intelligent machines, engineered bodies, algorithms that can manipulate people's emotions with uncanny precision, rapid man made climate cataclysms, and the need to change professions every decade. He asks, what is the right thing to do when confronting a completely unprecedented situation? How should you act when flooded by enormous amounts of information and there is absolutely no way you can absorb or analyze it all? How do you live in a world where profound uncertainty is not an anomaly but a normal feature? And he warns, as biotechnology and machine learning improve, it will become easier to manipulate people's deepest emotions and desires, and it will become more dangerous than ever to just follow your heart. When Coca Cola, Amazon, Baidu, or the government knows how to pull the strings of your heart and press the buttons of your brain, will you still be able to tell the difference between yourself and their marketing experts? So, to prepare our students, we put together a list from various authors. Derek Bock is a former president of Harvard. Nicholas Lehman is a former dean of Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. In Bock's list, what stands out to me are civic engagement, or being an upstanding and responsible citizen in a democracy, as well as moral integrity. In Lehman's list, it's to see things deeply, which probably is derived from a lifetime of study. But Harari's list is important to explain because they are a response to being able to navigate or even thrive in the 21st century. Critical thinking skills are needed so that one can make sense of the flood of information now available, distinguish fact from fiction, synthesize desperate bits of data to form a comprehensive and meaningful view of the world, communication skills so that one can express the ideas obtained from critical thinking clearly in oral and written forms, collaboration skills because the world of work will be organized in teams, and creativity because one will have to be resourceful and have the ability to generate original, imaginative, and inspired ideas. Then adaptability is needed because constantly changing circumstances will be the norm in the 21st century. Resilience because to be able to adapt to the constantly changing circumstances, one needs to have a deep store of emotional stability. Entrepreneurial spirit because to thrive in the 21st century, one will need to take the initiative. And most importantly, to be AI hack proof, one will need to invest time to know who he really is and what he wants from life. So, what initiatives resulted from the two insights? There are many, ranging from customer service to co curricular activities, but I will discuss three. The first is our adoption of Canvas. FEU was the first school in the Philippines that piloted Canvas in 2015 and one of the 7 schools that first adopted Canvas university-wide in 2016. Canvas is a state-of-the-art learning management system that is used in universities such as Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. In FEU, it has enhanced the user experience of students in that it efficiently organizes the learning activities and resources because everything is in one platform. And with Canvas, it becomes easier for teachers to adopt student centered pedagogies such as blended learning and the flipped classroom. But as an education administrator, I believe that the best benefit of Canvas is that it captures all the transactions on it. So it opens FU to the world of big data, data analytics, and data science. We can get students engagement on Canvas, what they do on it, how much time they spend on tests, on readings, etc. And the data on all these things will empower the university to further enhance the students' schooling experience and improve our student success rates through the use of predictive analytics. The second initiative is DLECT, the acronym for Digital Literacy, Effective Communication, and Critical Thinking. DLECT is a semester-long certificate program during which the faculty participants are fully deloaded of teaching duties while still fully paid. Faculty are trained in the DLECT skills and instructed on the philosophical underpinnings and practical strategies of student-centered pedagogical approaches such as the flipped classroom and blended learning. In effect, they are primed to take the leap in their teaching role from being the sage on the stage to becoming a guide on the side where, as coaches and mentors, they would give students the leeway to take the initiative in the latter's learning journeys. The third initiative is the FU Learning Journey or FLJ, a subject in which all students of a freshman cohort are enrolled through their entire stay in FEU. The FLJ provides a formal structure for mentoring students to help them A. Navigate their academic life cycle, B. Develop their inner resources to handle changes and challenges that come into their lives, and C. Shape their career and life goals. It is in part due to the FLJ that FU Manila was ranked 91st in the 2020 Global Top 100 Innovative Universities of the World Universities with Real Impact, or WURI, and 19th in the Ethical Value category. Thus far, the things I've talked about are not particular to the pandemic, but during this period, I think the special considerations are that taking a break from school should not be on the table. Instead, students should work to develop agency, resilience, and mindfulness. Taking a break is not an option for at least 3 evidence-based reasons. First, even over short periods like the summer break, students unlearn some of the things they have mastered. Second, a proportion who drop out of school never find their way back. Third, the lifetime income streams of returnees tend to be lower than those of their peers who never leave school. So students should really just slog through school even during this pandemic, but they need to develop agency, resilience, and mindfulness. Student agency is a concept I want to introduce into the vocabulary and discourse of Philippine education because it is an orientation that our students sorely lack. Student agency is defined as the capacity and propensity of students to take the purposeful initiative as opposed to feeling helpless. When students have agency, they will own their learning goals and be motivated to work at their own initiative instead of being passive recipients of instruction. Resilience, as I've described earlier, is about having deep stores of emotional balance, which we all need at this time, given the anxieties we are facing. Mindfulness is about being fully aware of our circumstances without being overly reactive or overwhelmed by them. When we are mindful, we reduce stress, enhance our performance, gain insight into what's happening with us, and increase our sensitivity to others' well being. So, to summarize the takeaways, because schooling is an experience good, to get the most out of it, the student must fully immerse herself in and fully engage the school's curricular and co-curricular offerings. For the schooling journey to be transformative, the student should use the time to capacitate herself for her aspired life. In particular, to navigate and even thrive in the 21st century, the student must develop skills and inner resources. And in the pandemic, the important inner resources are agency, resilience, and mindfulness. That ends my presentation. I hope the ideas resonated with you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alba. I think that's given us, among our three speakers today, we've had a very comprehensive view of education and all the issues that we face and all different aspects. Mind that we're talking about private education at this time because public school education is quite totally a different different matter altogether. And I think it's safe to say that we're all involved in the private school system. Either we've put our kids through it, we've been through it, or we're considering private schools for our children at all levels. So Lizzie, would you like to chime in now with
Sure, Bambina. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Alba and Henry and Feli for their informative presentations. When we talked about what we wanted to achieve on the panel, we discussed emotional well-being during pandemic times, both the students and the teachers. And given my background, I'd love to hear from Dr. Alba and Feli and Henry as well, your thoughts on, given my background as co-founder of Teach for the Philippines, of course, I'm focused on the teachers. And I think about how these educators who are creating the nurturing environments that you speak about, Dr. Alba, where our students can thrive, are feeling more stressed, more anxious than ever before. We all know that emotions matter in education. They matter for attention, concentration, memory. They matter because anxiety creates difficulty in decision making, and this is key in this new normal that we're living. Emotions matter for relationships, parent-teacher relationships, student-teacher relationships. Emotions matter for health and well-being. Emotions matter for motivation and engagement, overall performance. And here we have with our teachers feeling particularly overwhelmed. We already know, and we have plenty of evidence to show us that our teachers were stressed before COVID, and now this situation has exacerbated it in ways that are unimaginable. They're having to, before COVID, they were stressed around challenges in meeting their student learning needs, getting training and support from their administrators, adjusting to ever-changing curriculums, high-stakes testing, general life-work balance issues. But this has been exacerbated by COVID and the additional demands on their practice. This discussion around social and emotional learning in education has become more important today than ever before. And I wanted to ask you, what can we do to help our teachers? How can we support them? And are we doing enough?
Do you want the answer now, or do you want us
Yes,
to
yes.
answer that?
I'm reacting to your discussion, Dr. Alba, and you did touch on this a little bit more about the students and some of the qualities that they need to develop for
Right.
these circumstances.
Yeah.
But I think our teachers need, and your faculty, I'm sure, is feeling the same thing. Feli talked about it earlier about
Yeah.
how she discovered that it wasn't just the students, that it was her faculty.
Yeah. So in FEU, we've been mindful about both students and faculty being feeling isolated, and I guess not. So the way we've handled it is we have what we call regular kumustahan sessions, where our administrators actually hold. So we don't have Zoom, we have Teams instead. So we have regular Teams meetings just to check up on each other and maintain the sense of community. That's the short answer that I have. It's a way of propping up, if people have problems. um, there are other more, I guess, institutional avenues where we actually now have a what we call the tele well-being service of our guidance and counseling office. So they receive something like 50 sessions, 50 appointments every day to handle both student and faculty concerns. So those are the things we're doing.
Is social emotional learning a part of what's being discussed in private education in the Philippines? Is that something that we're working on?
Yes. So the well, just to be sure, we're learning as we go. I mean, it's not as if we have all our answers down pat, but um uh we've been with I lost my train of thought. Sorry. What was the
You
question
were saying
again?
that you were saying that you don't have it down pat, the social emotional learning module.
Right,
You don't
right.
have it down pat,
Um
but you're working on it. And
yeah, so I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, it'll come back to me later. Let me take a break.
well,
Uh,
what's interesting about talking about emotions, especially at a time of such high anxiety, and we worry about personal health, we worry about taking care of the ones around us, and then we have to worry about educating and meeting students at where they
yeah,
are.
yeah,
And I mean, these are stressors beyond belief on the
yeah,
educators. And then
right,
we think about the kind of characteristics you talked about some of them, and I think about the KIP Foundation. They have those 7 characteristics that lead to academic a success,
yeah,
and they're all emotional.
yeah,
About grit, about
yeah,
optimism, about self-control, about
yeah,
self-regulation, about gratitude, about social intelligence and curiosity. And I find that all of these are working around emotions. And
right,
while I'm focused on teachers and educators now, because they're the ones creating this nourishing environment that's helping our kids,
yeah,
it's also emotional on the kids'
yeah,
part. Here we are with this distance learning, unable
yeah,
to have the kind of life experiences that actually make the build
yeah.
on these characteristics, right? So, anyways, I wondered what your thoughts were
No,
on.
no. So, yeah. I remember the my answer is going to be that that we actually cautioned our teachers to mind themselves, because the hard part of the delivery methods, so we're now doing remote learning. And the hard part is that students can bug the teachers at all times of the day or night. They can send emails, they may want chats, or they can get to the discussion boards of Canvas. And so we said to the teachers, you should tell your students you can only be available, you'll answer your emails within the day, but you're only available for consultations within specific hours. And
Correct.
beyond that, you really have to also mind yourself.
And draw
Yeah,
the line.
right. Yeah.
Draw the
So
line.
yeah.
And
So
then a lot of these teachers are also saying that the parents are coming on into the camera space. They're arguing with the teacher, and the teacher's having to deal with the parent
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah,
student. And that's a very tough
yeah.
situation.
So I actually have a funny anecdote. We we're using MapGrowHill resources, AI resources now. So like we use Redbird and Alex. So these are apps in MapGrowHill that chart the mass that chart the individualized mastery paths of students in how they learn math. So the AI algorithm actually diagnoses what the students know, don't know, and are prepared to know. Okay, so the first in the diagnostic tests, the problem was that the parents were coaching their kids, and so the mastery paths was way over what the kids. I mean,
The
grade three
baseline.
kids
Yeah.
would be given material for grade six. And so the parents started complaining, why is the material so high? But then we said that's because you coached your your kids when they were taking the diagnostic tests. And that's actually for our basic education schools.
The dynamics are extraordinary, and the
Yeah.
stressors that they're adding to the whole learning process, as well as to the whole learning environment, there are difficult. Thank you, Dr. Alba. Thank you very much.
Professor De Dios, Professor Noel, can I ask you to chime in?
Yes. Well, thank you very much to all the speakers. It was very impressive to see how resilient your institutions have been, and in the case of Henry, how much rich material you're able to offer online. Actually, what that tells me, my reaction is that, see, all of this is possible, and the real question is what prevents it from being generally available to more people in more students in the country. And the fear is really that because of the pandemic, um, the institutions that were already resilient and prepared to begin with will fare much better as a result of it, whereas those who are less prepared, um, and we're referring mainly to the public education system, will be left behind. In the US, they talk about a K-shaped recovery. What that really means is that from a base, some um, some people in the society move up very quickly after the pandemic, whereas the others falter and fall behind. That's the real danger that we're really facing because of the pandemic. It's the experience of Chinese international school is really very enviable. The extent to which they're able to uh, um, devote both to change both the pedagogy and muster the resources. I'm I'm impressed that, let's say, at the basic education level, you're able to provide them EBSCO, for example, and open your library. That is something that's not simply not available to most people in the public sector. Or in fact, even for a majority of private universities. So the danger is really that you have this separation of uh, sectors in society. Uh, and what the pandemic has really done, as Henry has said, is that it has really just exposed long-standing problems in the education system and perhaps exacerbated them. And the threat or dangerous portents become even greater because the future society will present more challenges to this entire system, and some people will just be able to cope with the challenges better than others. I go back to Mike's um, uh, notion of the experience good, education as an experience good. I think it's very uh, fruitful to proceed in that fashion, because an experience good really requires two things. One is uh, it's the experience that's provided by the producer, but also the characteristics of the consumer. So there must be a match. Education becomes a bit more complicated because as an experienced good, the preferences of the consumer, in this case the student, they're not entirely formed. And, and, the, and the university itself has to play a role in setting, it's not as if the student has expectations that are fixed and then you just find a university that fits into that. The expectations of the student themselves have to be formed in the course of the education itself. But that really means that not just the case that there are ready-made kinds of universities to which you must match a student. For society as a whole, you must question whether the right sorts of teaching, the right sorts of values are being imparted by the universities. And that points to changing the university system's perception of education themselves. Even as we talk about the more complex skills that need to be learned, moving towards skills rather than degrees, having competencies rather than grades. Well, that's an ideal, but in order for the labor market and for the education market to buy into that entirely, the education system itself must change. And that's why you're getting a lot of these complaints from the private sector that the students that they're getting, even college graduates, don't have the right skills that are needed for their occupations. That's not going to change on its own. It's like a bad equilibrium that you have between the expectations of parents and students and the services that the universities provide. It's very rare that, well, FEU is a rare exception in that sense. And it's especially hopeful that FEU is doing it because FEU was built not as an elite university. Nicanor Reyes, the founder of FEU, really thought of it as providing a pathway for the middle class and the lower middle classes to progress. And therefore, it's a hopeful sign that a university like FEU, which is not an elite or exclusive school, can do these things. But it takes, I don't know what it will take for the bulk of the education system, and in particular the SUCs, to do something like that. I don't think it's going to be automatic. And I know Henry is hopeful that, I also believe that you should not waste a good crisis as an opportunity for reform, but it does not come automatically. It could just as well end where it started, where you have, the challenges being so great that people don't make the change anyway. And therefore you will just have this situation where a few forward-looking institutions with leaders like Mike and Felicia are able to anticipate the new trends, whereas the rest of the society is not. That's really my fear. But okay, Bambina asked me to talk about, mentioned something about what's going on elsewhere. Well, everybody's having a hard time. At the college level, I think even Ivy League universities are struggling with the issue of the pandemic. And most of them, the best practice appears to be that they go to distance learning and allow, the college experience, talking about immersive experience of Mike, part of the Ivy League experience is that you're residential and then you kind of imbibe the whole social atmosphere, you build networks. Well, that is a bit vitiated at the moment. And some are even questioning the value proposition of Ivy League. If you don't get that aspect of the experience, is it worth paying, say, 50, 60,000 for a Harvard degree? I guess if you value the degree and less the paper by itself, maybe some people are willing to pay that. But even there's a question of how that what the final shape of education might be. There may be some changes to education that will be permanent even after the pandemic. Uh, but like uh, Chinese school and FEU, a lot of the best universities were already preparing for this. Uh, um, I guess they were walking on two legs. They were already preparing for a digital future. So you have open courseware like for MIT, and some of them have already credited the MOOCs, massive open online courses, as being credited as for a degree in their universities. Uh, so those universities have already one foot in that kind of a system. I remember Mike long before already prophesying, preaching this paper by Barber et al. An avalanche is coming, which talks about a digital shape of education of the future. It's that kind of forward-looking thinking that I think will allow most of these universities to survive. But for example, there are institutions that are really struggling. For example, community colleges in the US, they're not equipped to do that, and they have to kind of massively shift their offerings. Aside from the fact that many of their students are working students and they've dropped out, they've not been able to continue, and that's a similar problem here that we face in the country. The effects of the pandemic will be with us in terms of the in terms of the dropouts, which Henry already mentioned, but also in terms of the reduced learning capacities of students who have delayed their schooling or who have their education actually reduced. It is a fact that the DepEd at the moment has reduced the learning competencies that they require from something like 70% in some subjects to even 90%. I think English, 90%, there's a reduction in the learning competency for English. These are the people, the students who will come into higher education, let's say 3-4 years from now. And therefore, the universities will have to work doubly hard in order to get them up to shape. Remember, the Philippines has not done very well even before the pandemic in the
PISA.
in the PISA
PISA.
rankings, where we landed, I think, last in math and second to the last in science. So that's the complication that the pandemic actually brings to us. Uh, in the end, there needs to be a kind of a social imperative to do something about education, not just cope with not just make do with what the pandemic imposes on us, but actually take a leap forward and say this cannot go on. The problems are exacerbated by the pandemic, and they have to be solved once and for all.
Well, that's very true. I just have we'll open it up to questions from the attendees. You can put your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box. But I just wanted to say, you were talking about, still, like Henry, you were saying about people still going through Education PH, looking at opportunities and all that. And Feli, you were talking about college preparedness, and Dr. Alba also talking about what you're doing in terms of resilience and preparing also your tertiary level students for the job market as well. And as you said, the job market itself is changing with jobs that never existed before coming to the fore, requiring different kinds of skills and adaptability. But would the graduates of like 2020, class of 2020 and say 2021, or for however long the pandemic lasts, are they somehow marked in terms of looking for jobs? Will there always be some kind of hesitation from employers saying, oh, you were the ones that graduated during the pandemic and you actually didn't finish school properly, you did it online, or I'm just asking if there's any kind of,
Good question.
No, there's actually evidence that students who graduate during a recession are marked for life, in that they have lower discounted lifetime earnings. That's the, I mean, it's not even from the pandemic, it's from previous recession or experience of previous recessions in the US. So surely I think that's likely to happen.
Kelly, do you get any questions from parents as well, saying what's the point of higher ed? Can you unmute?
Yes, I can share a personal experience. When I graduated from UPenn Business School as an undergrad, the average job offered to a Wharton undergrad was, let me get the number correct, because prior to that, the average job offer that a Wharton undergrad got was 5.7 jobs. During my time, it was 1.3. So yes, Dr. Alba is correct, because we were in the middle of a recession. And that was 1993, right before the bull run here in the Philippines. And interestingly, I mean, normally you'll get jobs in Wall Street. I got 0 offers in Wall Street. I got 3 job offers, which was higher than the average, but they were all as an insurance salesman, and I didn't want to be an insurance salesman. So yes, I second Dr. Alba's comment.
But how do you counsel parents now and students, obviously, because you're preparing them for college, when they start asking questions like that about the job, realistically what the job prospects would be for their child if they were to invest in, let's say an Ivy League education or an international education? I would assume that in your school they tend to go abroad, right? The students for
Yes.
yeah.
So I think for them it's really more. Yes, the school that they're headed to is important, but they also balance that with a value proposition. And I think that was mentioned by Dr. De Dios. Or was it Dr. Alba? One of them mentioned that the value proposition was very important as well. So is there going to be that social aspect? We don't want the remote learning. We want to be able to use the facilities and be able, and especially those that whose degrees are highly dependent on an experiential learning, whether it's design technology or whether it's biology and being able to use the labs. Those are factors as well. But nonetheless, they still will push through and apply for college despite the pandemic.
Yeah, I've heard. I mean, I heard initially that there were parents that wanted to keep their children back, right? But then,
yes,
I'm not sure if that's actually happened, because then there were also, comments that freshman year 2021 would have 2. If you have all these students taking a gap year, then you'd enter freshman 2021 with double the population. I mean, that was a possibility as well.
I think there's a decline in enrollment.
Yes, that's what I saw.
Private schools, especially. Maybe the cost element.
Okay, let's go to some of the questions.
I just wanted to.
Yes, Feli.
I just wanted to add a little bit to Lizzie's point and Dr. Alba's answer to the spotlight being on social and emotional well-being, and I think because it's just so important to us right now. And we talk about nurturing and developing grit, resiliency. We talk about it's not just IQ and EQ anymore, that we're looking for AQ, the adversity quotient. And so I think what's really at its core, I think it's really important for us, or at least in our institution, we let people know, we let students know, we let faculty know that it's okay not to feel okay. It's okay. And we also, we let them know that it's not a stigma and that we accept it. We accept it, and whether it's just anxiety and tension, to something that's, anxiety disorder or panic attacks to a full-blown, let's say, mental illness. And then lately, we've been talking about advocate as well for mental illness. So what's very interesting is that, we've received feedback that, yes, we brag about how many Red Cross certifications we have, and that if there's a physical illness, we know what to do. We know how the CPR, we know the basics of how to stop choking. And yet, when a colleague or a classmate turns to you and say, you know what, I want to kill myself. We're not equipped. The school has not equipped us. What do we say? What do we do? And so why is it that we keep on, physical illness when really mental illness is equally important? And so it's on the table right now to allow an excused absence as well for students if they call in and they say, you know what, I feel overwhelmed. I wasn't able to sleep last night. I feel overwhelmed. And that would allow us to mark them with an excused absence. But of course, with same as I have a fever or I'm coughing, there's a set number. And same goes for the faculty and staff as well. So that's on the table right now.
That's beautiful, Feli. I congratulate you. I think that teaching teachers and educators and administrators the significance of social first aid is the most important thing that we can do right now to create an environment where all of us can survive and thrive, not just survive, but thrive as well. And so thank you, Feli. That's beautiful what you're doing. Congratulations. We don't hear enough of that. We don't hear enough of that. And I worry, we work at Teach for the Philippines, we work in the public school system, and the level of stress that they're handling is extraordinary. Our teachers are handling is extraordinary. So I worry about that. And I appreciate the opportunity to bring it up and hear your own experiences. Thank you.
But Lizzie, if I may, you were talking about the public teachers in general and how they're coping. How do you train teachers now to, and I can ask this as well of Dr. Alba and Feli, how are teachers now trained to become kind of,
well, they're not
these platforms? And
yeah,
because it's not traditional learning, at all. It's not traditional educational style at all. And so how do you give them the confidence as well? There's a confidence issue too, and that they're also able to deliver the lessons properly and to reach the students and make a difference actually.
and that's what's creating the greatest stress in all of our teachers is the fact that they're not being able to meet their students at their needs. And that is a tremendous stressor for them. At Teach for the Philippines, when we train our teachers, we do psychosocial first aid modules, and we also do trauma training for our teachers because we find that a lot of the students who live in some of the most under-resourced communities have also been affected by trauma. So we do that kind of training because we understand that learning cannot happen when you're not emotionally well, but also teaching can't happen when you're not emotionally well. So what Feli's doing at Chinese International is really an example for all of us. Thank you.
In our case, actually, we had the advantage that our teachers had been extensively trained. The good thing about the legislative shocks was that so one good thing was in 2016 we did not have college freshmen, and in 2017 we didn't have freshmen and sophomores in school. So we had teachers who had no loads, but instead of retrenching them, we chose to train them instead. So as I said in my presentation, we did the DLECT where they were trained. We were trying to prime them to change their roles from being the sage on the stage, where they're the,
Yeah.
it's one-way delivery, they're the wise guys in the classroom, to having the students take the lead in their education. So with their training in blended learning and the flipped classroom, we felt that it was easier for the teachers to make the transitions. They already knew how to do the course modules. So the reimagination was frantic, but they knew what to do in the summer months. So I felt that it really made the transition smooth for us.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, but you were proactive in that sense, no? Because a lot of the institutions in this particular instance or in previous instances have been more reactive than proactive. So actually, you doing that has made a world of difference, really,
Yeah.
in your preparedness for the current situation, right?
Yeah.
May I ask a question of Henry? There was a question here asking about what jobs then do you envision are going to be coming up, and what courses do you take to prepare for those jobs? You said because it's changing so rapidly.
Yes. Can I be a terrible panelist and first answer one of the other questions?
Sure.
If that's okay, just for a hot minute. Because I've been taking a lot of notes, and uh, I think the first thing is on teachers, what I think we underestimate is how many hats we ask them to wear. Because we use the term teacher very loosely, and you think teacher like, oh yes, the one who teaches like my child math or history, but actually you're asking them to be a tutor, a guidance counselor, a librarian, an admin person who tells you all the debit announcements. And I think that's typically what's so hard about being a teacher is you're wearing multiple hats. And if you add up the duties of all these hats, you physically cannot do it. It doesn't matter. And I think it's something you see with TFP, right, where you get some of the brightest students from some of the best universities, and they come in and they're willing to work, 80-hour weeks. And I have some friends who went through TFP, and they always tell me that, there's never enough hours in a day. They're like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. So I think we really need to understand that there's an overload. And I think part of the way, and this is, I'm biased obviously because we believe in edtech, but we literally have to make sure we come up with solutions that reduce that load, right?
Agree.
How much of a teacher's job can be supported by online solutions, right? So could all the announcements from DepEd be done electronically? So that as a teacher, you know that it's going to be on Twitter, on Facebook, in email and SMS. And so you don't have to spend an hour a day just figuring out if your students even know when school is reopening. In terms of some of the questions that students might have with their homework, I know that DepEd has done work with Globe about creating, I think it's called the DepEd Commons, where they're putting a lot of learning materials online. And you kind of want to have that as your line of first defense, not as a way of shirking your responsibilities, but leveraging technology. And again, there's the whole divide issue of who has internet access, but for those who do, the first place where they should look for information should be, platforms like the DepEd Commons done with Globe, should be Khan Academy, should be Education, should be all these other websites. And then if you still need help, then you turn to the teacher. And I think we need to use technology to essentially reduce the hours required by teachers and not allow them to do their job better. I think that's because, from our perspective, when we look at teachers, we think they're just overloaded. And so it's like an overloaded employee. It doesn't matter how competent or how driven that person is. There's only so much you can do in a week. I think furthermore on the tech solutions, it's really important for us to automate as much as possible as well any of the information that can help students and their parents deal with anxiety. So, can you use chatbots? Can you use online education modules in English that are very high quality out there? At the high school level, that can be from Khan Academy. At the college level, there's some excellent materials. I think, agree that sadly, schools like FEU or CISM are the minority. But our view at Education is we're actually quite bullish because for all the kids who are studying in other schools, they will take matters into their own hands. And if you put them along on the right pathway, they can get a very high quality, what we call parallel education. So some of the best developers in the Philippines today will have a formal college degree from a Philippine university, but then they'll learn the latest coding language through, AWS, through YouTube, through Udacity. And so by the time they graduate, they do have the right skill set. Unfortunately, not always from the school that they went to, but there's ways of acquiring that skill set online. And so again, we think this is one of the positives of of COVID is online ed in the Philippines didn't work until this year. We've been trying to push it for since 2017. People were not interested. Students, parents, schools, there was just not that much take up. 2020, searches for online went up like 10, 20x. And so I think you will see people more and more be able to get the skills that they need for the job market. And to actually answer your question, which was around, the skills of tomorrow and the jobs of tomorrow, I think there's a lot of great work that's done by job portals like JobStreet, like LinkedIn, like Caliber. And part of what we're trying to do is try to get students to start consuming that information, which feels very adulty. But the best way of figuring out what the jobs of the future are to talk to basically the job platforms who are currently, who are always looking at that, because that's their whole business. I think obviously a lot of the tech roles are growing in importance, but you'd be amazed. There's more traditional jobs like engineering, which the Philippines will be needing for the next like 10, 15 years as we keep on building infrastructure. And so I think, yeah, a lot of information is out there, but again, it's like, how do you get it to the students in a way that's easy to consume?
Well, that's true. But like you said, it's always changing. I remember when my kids were considering, even just going to college, they were saying already the jobs when you start high school, the job market now, the jobs that are available now will be so different from the jobs that are available by the time you finish high school. So it's so rapid, so it's like also in terms of adaptability and being able to apply yourself to kind of like a multidisciplinary kind of approach, I guess. So finding extensions for your skills that you've learned and applying it, finding ways to apply it in, I suppose, in ways that could also be financially rewarding at some point. I have a question for you, Professor De Dios. You're talking about social imperative. How do you make a social imperative to improve education? Who would be best to lead that? And what exactly do you think we need to improve first? And I think I can bundle this with another question about how we can help the Philippine public school system today.
Well, obviously, you have to start with the public school system. And unfortunately, that's something that's under the government's political fiat. It's something that you must have essentially an administrator that realizes the strategic problem of the education system. And across administrations, it's not going to take just one, pursue a program that reconfigures education in that manner. It's a slow process, but part of the pressure, I think, is going to come from employers and the initiative, as Henry has mentioning, the initiative of students themselves to try to acquire those skills that employers want. Therefore, it's really important to have information flowing from potential employers about what skills rather than degrees they value, and get this to the students so that they can get it, if not from the universities they attend, then from online material. The ideal situation would be, of course, if the universities themselves, if the degree granting institutions themselves bought into that kind of credentialing system, moving away from the traditional system. But I think that's gonna take a long time. Even in other countries, it's not. It's the pressure is coming from the outside. So you have Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who say that I'll pay you a job if you immediately come out of high school and work for me. I forget the name of that entrepreneur. He's encouraging people not to go to college, but instead to start working, acquiring skills and start working for a company. That's social pressure that puts the onus on formal institutions to change the way they deliver content. On the other hand, you have to watch out for the from for the other extreme, the the notion that education is purely skills acquisition. Uh, uh, I think that's what Mike was trying to point out a while ago, that there is an aspect of education that is civic, that is moral, and you don't get that essentially by taking an online course in coding. Uh, if education were really just acquiring specific competencies in order to serve an employment purpose, then we probably would not need the entire college experience. But I think the advantage of the college experience is that it's trying to deliver um, a whole for the person, and the more it fits the strengths and weaknesses of that particular person, the better it is, the better is the experience. So I don't know where it will end up. The desirable end is really a formal education system that is adept and flexible and attuned to the jobs of the future and the fact that these jobs may be changing. But in the meantime, I think there's value to having parallel systems so that students and parents have options other than the formal education system. Uh, Although in a way it's a waste, right? If the formal education system does not deliver the kind of competencies that are required in the actual employment process. But I think you'll have to live with that in the meantime. But the most basic pressure uh, ought to be on the basic education system, the foundation for even before you get into the higher tertiary education system. Uh, the input into the tertiary education system is only as good as what the private, as the basic education system delivers.
May I add to Noel's point? In FEU, we're starting to actually consider not just recording the transcript of records or the grades of students, but that we're beginning to we're trying to find a system that will save the students assignments, projects, because at the end, what we'd like is in addition to the transcript of records, we'll give them a portfolio of their demonstrated competencies so that that's what they can show to their employers so that they can do. So it's just hard to imagine, what kind of storage capacity we need to bring to the fore. But that's the kind of discussion we're having now, that the grades will not matter. It's really the skills that the students and the evidence will be in their projects that they've undertaken in their coursework.
I think, look, do we have time for a couple more questions? Can you stay a little bit more? We still have
Sure.
just maybe another 10 minutes because there are a lot of questions coming in. I think you were talking about like Feli had to go, but she had mentioned about the new things that the way we had to adapt now with IQ, EQ, and AQ, the adversity quotient, right? Carmen Ong is asking, are there any metrics now to have schools created any metrics to measure that, to some kind of standard to see if there's been any kind of development in those particular aspects? Or would you
Not that idea.
formulate one? Because that's becoming more and more an important aspect of education, of coping with the new realities, right?
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of research around that. And just like Dr. Alba was talking earlier about the skill sets that you certify at the end of an education, not just an academic performance, but also certifying certain skills. One of my points is that we should be certifying also emotional skills, self-regulation, perseverance, resilience. If we're trying to build these skills in this in this agility and all of these things should also be there. We can develop metrics and we can develop, but there's a lot of research being done, but I'm not sure. I know a lot is coming, Dr. Alba, from the Yale Institute on Emotional Intelligence. A lot of
I
that
went to
work,
it.
yes, I think a lot of that work is coming out of there, a lot of research on how this can be actually part of a curriculum, part of an intention, and how maybe perhaps those things can with certain experiences be measured or evidenced at least.
Yeah. The closest thing we have, I guess, in FEU is the FEU learning journey. So
Mhm.
what happens with that is each freshman cohort is enrolled in a course throughout their stay in FEU. That's the learning journey, and then they're given a bunch of questions per sem. Like 50 questions are thrown at them, where they have to answer 20. And throughout the sem, they have to answer 20 essays. They have to submit 20 essays on various topics, and there are faculty mentors who actually read through the essays. And we're now trying to bring in AI to identify, keywords. Um, the idea is we want to spot students on the basis of their answers. We want to spot whoever has problems, whoever is dealing with adversity, and then to then nudge them to consult either a faculty mentor or a guidance counselor. So those are the things that we're trying to do, but we haven't really thought about really go. I mean, formulating an adversity quotient index or emotional index. We haven't gotten that far. It's more about just getting the students to open up to us so that we could understand them better.
But that's an excellent question. It's an excellent question from Carmen Ong and a very important one.
Corollary to that, though, we're talking about adaptability as well, and we've heard this said during this whole pandemic: adapt or die. It's about trying to stay alive in this in the current under the current circumstances. What about teachers who refuse to, you know, to change the way they teach, or they just say, well, I'm not for this, I can't do online, and I mean, you probably have encountered those
Yes.
teachers as well. How do you deal with that?
Well, we've had teachers who filed their resignations.
Early
But
retirement.
there's really nothing we could do about it. If they're not willing to change, I mean, how do they remain productive if all they want is to do face to face, and that's not, in person schooling is really not
Yeah.
possible right now. But
Also,
they've been few.
yeah, made me think of something though. Also, that how a lot of people say there was that one teacher that made a difference. Could that also happen now that it's online and you don't have that face-to-face interaction? The teacher will probably single out one student, seeing maybe a lot of potential in the student, and taking time outside the class to say, why don't you write a story about this? I can see that you're really interested, or whatever. How does that happen now?
Well, the good thing is that we use Canvas. So in Canvas, you can upload all the course materials, but there's a chat box, there's a discussion board, there are announcements there. So like Henry was saying, announcements, we can do an email blast to all our students in one go in Canvas. Discussion, and we also have Office 365, where we use Teams extensively. So with Teams, we can actually that a teacher can actually form a small group of students where they can collaborate to do a project, or she can call a student and have a one-on-one meeting with that student and give advice. So that's been the good thing with our online resources that we've had. We had invested in these things previously, so it was easy to make the transition.
I'd like to thank you all for staying overtime today. This was a really interesting discussion. I think there's so much still to learn about learning. I'd like to thank our Manila House members who joined us today. Please don't forget to make use of your F&B vouchers, and there's more if you want. And come to the club because we've been open all this time and now extended hours because of the GCQ, the new GCQ regulations. We have a talk coming up November. We have our virtual gin event on October 29. Please join us. We also have in November, just giving you a heads up, we have a talk about golden passports and immigration investment. And November 11, we have a talk with JP Morgan about, we'll know who the president is, the new president of the United States, and what are the implications for the international economy, the global economy as well. So thank you again to our very distinguished panel for being with us today.
Thank you for including us, Bambina. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can I just ask Professor
So
DeVos to give some closing remarks? Right.
Oh.
Before we close, yeah.
Well, it's a challenging time for all of us, but it will require a lot of hard work to come up better as a result of all of it. The problem that these quarantines give us is that it's really harder to form groups that take the initiative. We have to find a different way of doing it, and I think pressuring government and bringing out problems is important. But how to do it in an organized and constructive way will take a bit of thinking at the moment. Of course, we're hoping that some of this might be relieved when there's a vaccine or better therapeutics arrive. But I don't think there should be any doubt that there is scarring from this pandemic, and we have to attend to that scarring even after the immediate danger of the pandemic is over. I wish I had a more optimistic way to end it, but I think what's needed is to motivate ourselves by realizing how severe the problem can be. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think your analogy of a scar is actually very, very apt at this point, because we're all wounded in a way by all this, but a scar is a sign of healing. And it's how we go on, even despite the scarring, and continue with life, basically. So hopefully we leave on that message of hope.
Thank you.
And thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is a really important discussion, and I would have stayed for more, but I know I've imposed a lot on your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care. Bye, Henry. Bye, Dr. Alba.
Bye, Dr. Alba. Bye.
Bye, Bambina. Thank you for including us.